The drill bit was already through the strike plate when I pulled into my own driveway. A stranger was kneeling at my front door. My door, the one my late wife picked out 11 years ago, fitting a brand new brass deadbolt into the frame. 2 empty boxes sat flattened beside the welcome mat. Third lock of the afternoon. I didn't get out of the truck right away. I just sat there, engine ticking as it cooled, watching a man I'd never met try to lock me out of the last place my wife ever lived. Not fear. Not yet. Just cold. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays are Frank's day, and I'd just come from lunch with him, still half thinking about the conversation we'd had, when the whole afternoon turned into something else entirely in the space of about 4 seconds. The drill was cordless, newer than anything I owned. His van sat crooked. Back wheel up on the grass Dolores used to fuss over every spring. On the porch step, a clipboard with a printed work order, my address typed clean across the top, like it belonged to somebody else's paperwork entirely. "Help you find something?" I said, walking up. He flinched, the drill slipping in his hand. "Sir, this is a scheduled job. I've got a work order right here. This is my house." He checked the slip clipped to his clipboard. "Says Renee Hutchins requested it. Says she's the homeowner's daughter-in-law. Authorized on the account." Authorized. On my own front door, my name is Gerald Hutchins, 74 years old, 31 years with the Postal Service, retired station supervisor. I raised a son in that house. I buried my wife from that house. I do not get confused about what's mine. But standing in that driveway, hearing a stranger tell me my daughter-in-law had signed off on locking me out of my own home, something in my chest went very quiet and very cold. Welcome to Revenge Realm. This goes a lot deeper than a set of locks. Subscribe. You're going to want to see how this ends. Let me back up 6 weeks. I'd been a widower 4 years. Dolores passed in the spring of 2021. Cancer, quick at the end, slow getting there. You just learn to carry it differently. Some mornings lighter than others. We raised one son in that house. Todd, 41, married 9 years, to a woman named Renee. Todd sells medical equipment, on the road 3 weeks out of every month. Good with people, less reliable with follow-through. Still my son, still loved without condition. Renee I never quite figured out. Polished, always put together. Grew up without much, I knew that secondhand, and built herself into a woman who looked like she'd never wanted for anything a day in her life. I respected the hustle. What I didn't know yet was how much of that polish was financed by debt. Nobody talked about it Thanksgiving. The house was paid off in 2016. No mortgage, no liens, nothing but property tax and the occasional roof repair. A modest pension, savings Dolores and I, built over 4 decades of not spending money we didn't have, a life insurance payout I'd never touched. Exactly the kind of number people start asking about indirectly. In the careful, roundabout way people ask about things they've already decided they want. I'd told Todd plainly, more than once, that everything Dolores and I built would come to him eventually when I was good and finished needing it. Just a fact, stated plain, the way you'd state a fact about the weather. I didn't think a fact stated plainly could be mistaken for a timeline. My routine hadn't changed since Dolores passed. Coffee at 6. Crossword by 7. A walk around the block if the knee allowed it. Tuesday lunch with Frank Delgado, my old coworker from the post office, now working the counter at the credit union on 87th Street. 30 years, same rhythm. I want to be fair to her here, because fair matters even once you know how a thing ends. There was a Christmas 4 years back, before Dolores got sick, when Renee spent an entire Saturday afternoon in my garage, helping me sort through 40 years of Dolores's ornaments, boxing up the ones we'd stopped using, wrapping the ones we hadn't in tissue paper she'd bought herself without being asked. She didn't have to do that. Todd was traveling that whole week. She came anyway, on her own, and she never once mentioned it afterward like it was owed to her. I liked her, genuinely, for a long stretch of years. That's not something I say to excuse what came later. It's something I say because it's true, and because the hardest part of all this wasn't discovering a stranger. It was discovering that the woman who'd once wrapped ornaments for a mother-in-law she barely knew was the same woman capable of what came next. It started small. It always does. Renee began stopping by on Sundays. Just to check on me, she'd say. Casseroles I hadn't asked for. Comments about the stairs looking steeper, the yard getting away from me, how she worried about me rattling around this big house alone. You ever think about somewhere smaller, Gerald? Somewhere with people around? I'd smile and change the subject. Told her I planned on being carried out feet first. It usually got a laugh out of her, or something shaped like one. She'd laugh like I'd made a joke. Her eyes didn't laugh with her mouth. Then, one Sunday in August, over coffee at my own kitchen table, she mentioned it almost in passing, that a neighbor had told her I'd left the stove on the week before. I hadn't. I told her so, flat. She just nodded, like she was filing it away rather than hearing it. I filed it away too. Didn't know yet I'd need it. The first real crack came in September, over Tuesday lunch with Frank, same booth, same diner on Metcalf. Frank set his coffee down harder than usual. Gerald, I need to ask you something. Don't get upset with me for asking it. Hell of a way to start a sentence, Frank. Did you authorize a joint accounting query last week? Someone came in asking to be added as a secondary signer on your savings. Said she was your daughter-in-law. Said you were having memory trouble. I set my fork down. I didn't authorize a damn thing. That's what I figured. Didn't process it. Policy requires you present in person, thank God. Wanted you to hear it from me first. Memory trouble. Did I sound like I had memory trouble an hour ago when I beat you at gin rummy? Frank didn't laugh. I've known you 30 years, Gerald. I've never seen you forget a single thing you didn't want to forget. That's exactly why this bothers me. I drove home at exactly the speed limit. That's how you know my mind was somewhere else. Sat in the driveway 10 minutes before going in. Somebody was building a story about me. One brick at a time. The stove, the memory trouble, the account inquiry. All the same brick, laid in different places. 2 weeks later, Renee showed up with a folder. Not a casserole, a folder. I've been doing some research, she said, sliding it across my kitchen table like a favor. Cedarbrook Senior Living. Independent living, but support right there if you need it. I toured it myself. It's beautiful. Glossy brochure. A price sheet that tightened my chest before I even hit the fine print. And underneath, a single sheet I almost missed. A durable power of attorney form, already filled in with my information, missing only a signature. What's this? I asked, keeping my voice level. Standard paperwork places like this require. For emergencies. It doesn't mean anything right now. It's just smart planning. Just smart planning, handed to me with a casserole I hadn't ordered and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'll think about it, I said, which is the same as no. She knew that. The smile stayed. Something behind it went very still. If you're still here, you already know these people don't stop at one folder. Drop a like if you've got a Renee in your own family. I started a notebook that week. Dates. What was said. By whom. 31 years of postal work teaches you that paper outlasts memory. And memory was exactly what somebody seemed determined to make me doubt. Todd called a few nights later. Somewhere between hotels, voice tired the way it always is 3 states deep into a trip. Renee mentioned you two had a good talk about Cedarbrook. We didn't talk about anything, son. She talked. I mostly ate my pot roast. He laughed, easy, the laugh of a man who wasn't in the room and had no reason to think there was anything under the surface worth examining. She just worries, Dad. You know how she is. I know how she is, I said, and left it right there. I didn't have anything solid enough to hand him yet, and I wasn't about to hand my son a suspicion with no weight behind it. 2 days after that call, I got a strange one from Carol Whitmore. Lives 3 doors down. Church friend of Renee's more than a friend of mine, Gerald. I hope this isn't out of line, she said. Renee mentioned you'd had a fall in the driveway last week. I just wanted to check you're all right. There was no fall. I told her so, calm as I could manage. Oh, she said, that's odd. She was pretty specific about it. Specific about a thing that never happened. I thanked Carol, hung up, and added her name to the notebook. Whoever was building this case against me wasn't just working on Todd anymore. She was recruiting witnesses. That's when I stopped thinking of it as worry and started thinking of it as a campaign. There was one more call that same week, though I didn't understand what it meant until later. My insurance agent, a young man named Peter Sung, who'd handled my homeowners and life policy since Dolores and I switched providers back in 2011, called to ask, casual as anything, whether I'd been thinking about updating my beneficiary designations. No particular reason, he said. Just something that came up. Someone called the office asking whether beneficiary changes require the policyholder present in person, or whether a power of attorney could handle it on his behalf if he were ever unable to. Did they give a name? Said she was your daughter-in-law. Wanted to know for planning purposes, in case anything ever happened. I thanked Peter, told him nothing had happened and nothing was changing, and hung up feeling the floor tilt a little further under me. The bank. The neighbor. Now the insurance agent. 4 different doors in 4 different directions, and every single one of them opened with the same key. Concern, stated plainly, aimed at people who had no reason yet to ask a harder question back. I added Peter's name to the notebook, right under Carol's. I called him back the following week, just to check whether anyone had followed up on that beneficiary question since. Nobody had, he said. But he'd flagged it internally regardless, in case it ever came up again. Small thing. But it meant one more institution now had a written record of the exact same pattern showing up at their door, which was one more brick in a wall I hadn't set out to build, and now couldn't stop building. I didn't sleep well that week. Not from fear. My mind just works the way it always has, the way it worked sorting 40,000 pieces of mail a night. Find the pattern, follow it. Don't stop until every piece is accounted for. I sat at my kitchen table one night with a legal pad and wrote everything down in order. The stairs, comment, the stove, the neighbor's fall that never happened, the joint signer attempt, the folder. By the time I set the pen down, it didn't look like worry anymore. It looked like a pattern with a direction. Wednesday morning, I called James Aldrich, the attorney who'd drawn up Dolores's and my wills back in 2015. Steady man. Doesn't waste a sentence. I laid it out across his desk. Frank's warning, the stove comment, Carol's call, Peter Sung's call about the insurance policy, the folder, the blank POA form I'd photographed before handing the original back untouched. James listened without interrupting, making the occasional note on a legal pad in handwriting I couldn't read upside down. When I finished, he set his pen down and leaned back. Gerald, what you're describing has a name. Elder financial exploitation. It's more common than people want to believe, and it starts exactly like this. Small requests, framed as care, and that neighbor call you just told me about. That's not incidental. That's her laying groundwork for a guardianship filing. Witnesses who'll say they heard about falls, memory lapses, secondhand. It's how these petitions get built when the family itself can't produce proof on its own. So what do? Sign nothing. Say nothing they can use later to claim diminished capacity. Document everything starting today. He slid a card across the desk. And call this woman, private investigator, elder cases only. Marlene O.C. Thorough. Discreet. How does something like this usually get stopped? I asked. Before it gets as far as a courtroom. Most of the time it doesn't get stopped early. Families don't catch it until the guardianship petition's already filed, and by then you're fighting from behind. The fact that you're sitting in my office asking that question before any petition exists puts you ahead of 90% of the cases I've seen. That's not luck, Gerald. That's Frank noticing something wrong and you taking him seriously instead of brushing it off. The insurance call worries me almost as much as the bank did, he added. That's not a woman checking on your well-being anymore, Gerald. That's a woman mapping every account you hold, one institution at a time, figuring out which door opens easiest. I want Marlene looking at all of it, not just the bank and the folder. Well, one thing, James said. Given what you're describing, I want you to do something else too. Go see your doctor. Full physical, full cognitive screening, on the record, dated this month. Not because I think there's anything wrong with you. Because if this ever gets in front of a judge, I want a clean, current, independent record showing exactly where you stand, made before anyone had a reason to dispute it. I made the appointment that same afternoon. Before I left his office that day, James pulled out a second folder, my own, this time, the one he'd kept on file since 2015. While we're at it, I want to update your will and your existing power of attorney designation. Not because anything's changing about who inherits what. Because I want it dated this month, naming someone you actually trust to act on your behalf if you're ever genuinely unable to, so there's no ambiguity left for anyone to exploit. Right now, the only power of attorney document in existence tied to your name is the blank one sitting in Renee's folder. I don't like that math. We spent 40 minutes going through it. Todd still named as the sole beneficiary. Still named as the person I'd trust to act for me if it ever came to that. But freshly signed, freshly dated, witnessed and notarized that same afternoon, a full 3 weeks before Renee's petition would ever exist. James called it closing the last open door before anyone thought to try it. Marlene called within the hour. Calm, no wasted words. Mr. Hutchins. Most of the time it's family. Financial pressure driving it. Rarely pure malice. That doesn't make it less serious. It just tells us where the evidence lives. Give me a week. I saw Dr. Emerson that Friday, the same physician who'd handled my checkups for 11 years. Blood pressure, blood work, a battery of memory and orientation questions that felt almost insulting in how easy they were. What year it was, who the president was, counting backward from 100 by sevens. He walked me through a full cognitive screening on top of the physical, said it was worth having in the file given what I'd described to him about the family situation. Everything here is exactly what I'd expect from a man your age in good health, he said, signing the chart. No concerns, I'll have this typed up and dated for your records within the week. I didn't know yet how much that single Friday afternoon appointment was going to matter. I just knew James was rarely wrong about what a man needed before he needed it. That week was the longest of the 6. I kept my normal routine on the outside. Coffee, crossword, the walk if my knee allowed it, but underneath it my mind never really stopped circling. Renee called Wednesday, same casual voice as always, asking how I was doing. I answered same as always. Fine, Renee. Can't complain. Learning for the first time in my life how to hold a conversation with somebody while knowing something they didn't know I knew. If you've made it this far, subscribe. Because the next part is where the whole thing cracks wide open. 5 days later, Marlene called back early. Said she'd found enough not to wait. Corner booth, coffee shop off 119th Street. Her laptop angled away from the window. I'll walk you through this in order. Order matters. She slid a timeline across the table. Your son and daughter-in-law are $41,000 in consumer debt, 3 payments behind on the mortgage. Your son already told you that part. What he doesn't know is this. She turned the page. Renee's been in contact for 4 months with a woman named Diane Voss. Senior placement consultant for 3 facilities, Cedarbrook among them. She earns a commission per resident placed, and she coaches families on language to support a diminished capacity claim. Confusion, forgetfulness, wandering, true or not. My stomach turned over slow. How did you find her? Voss, same way I find most of them. Placement consultants who work this angle tend to show up in the same online groups, the same forums where families trade advice about aging parents. Voss has a pattern. I found 2 other families this year alone, who described almost identical language coming from her. The same phrases, the same suggested documentation, the same urgency about deadlines. You're not the first file that pattern's shown up in. You're just the first one who caught it before it went anywhere. Renee's been using that language? She turned her laptop around. An email thread dated 3 weeks earlier. Read the third line down yourself. I read it. Renee's own words typed out plain. Increasingly forgetful, potentially unsafe alone, asking what documentation they'd need for, quote, the guardianship conversation. If I kept refusing the POA, guardianship, not just paperwork anymore. A judge deciding I couldn't decide for myself. There's a text thread, too, Marlene said, between Renee and Carol Whitmore. Renee coaching her almost word for word on what to say if anyone from the county ever calls asking about your well-being. The false story, the confusion. Carol pushed back once, asked if any of it was true. Renee's response was one line. It doesn't have to be true, it just has to sound consistent. I sat with that a long moment. My own neighbor, rehearsed like a witness for a trial that hadn't been filed yet. How did you get all this? I asked. The texts. The email to Voss public-facing accounts, court records from 2 similar cases I've worked, and one conversation with a former employee of Voss's who left that job for reasons she was more than willing to talk about. Once I explained what I was looking into, none of it required anything you'd need to worry about legally. People leave a trail whether they mean to or not. There's more, Marlene said, the locksmith. Scheduled for next Thursday, 2 to 5. Authorized by a call Renee made 3 days ago, claiming to be your emergency contact. Thursday, not your normal Tuesday lunch with Frank. They picked a day you'd likely be home to find it already done. I sat very still. I've delivered a lot of bad news to a lot of doorsteps in 31 years. I never once thought I'd be the one standing on the wrong side of a door that used to be mine. One more thing. The joint signer attempt Frank flagged wasn't the first try. Renee spoke to a different teller 2 weeks, asking what it would take to have a relative declared, unable to manage his own finances, told correctly that it required either your consent or a court order. That's what set the guardianship plan in motion. When the easy door didn't open, she found a harder one. A person who panics once, I could understand. A person who tries 3 different doors is looking for a way in. There's a number attached to all of this too if you want it, Marlene said. Cedarbrook's standard placement runs just under $6,000 a month. The discounted enrollment window brings that down by almost a third for the first year. Add that to what a guardianship would have given Renee access to. Your savings, the life insurance payout, the equity in this house. And you're looking at a plan that solves every financial problem she has within about 18 months, assuming nobody ever asked a single hard question. Offer vying. Last thing. Cedarbrook runs a reduced rate window that closes end of month. If Renee gets you placed, or a guardianship filed, before then, the family saves money during exactly the stretch they need it most. This isn't about your safety, Mr. Hutchins. The timeline lines up with the debt too precisely to be anything but calculated. I thought about the garage full of ornaments, wrapped so carefully. I thought about the casserole, and the folder disguised as concern, and how much easier all of it would have been to swallow if any single piece of it had come with even a trace of honesty attached, desperate or cruel. Maybe both. I need it airtight, I told her. Every email, every call log, every text with Carol, every dollar. Already compiling it. Full file by Friday. I drove home with the windows down, not really seeing the road. I was thinking about how many people it had taken to build a case against a man who'd never done a single thing wrong. A daughter-in-law, a placement consultant, a neighbor, all of them convincing themselves it counted as help. 2 days after that meeting with Marlene, before I'd even had the chance to call Todd, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. County plate. A woman in a gray blazer got out with a clipboard of her own. Mr. Hutchins, I'm with Adult Protective Services. We received a welfare concern call about you. Would you mind if I came in and asked a few questions? My stomach dropped, then settled. I knew exactly where this had come from. Come on in, I said. Coffee's fresh. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table the folder had landed on weeks before, and worked through her questions calm and professional. Did I know today's date? Did I manage my own medications? Did I feel safe in my home? Was anyone pressuring me about finances? I answered every one of them plain and complete, and when she asked if there was anything I wanted to add, I told her, yes, there was, and I went and got the Manila folder, and Dr. Emerson's report, fresh back from the office that same week. She read through both without a word for a long stretch. When she looked up, her face had changed. Mr. Hutchins, I want to be straight with you. The call we received described you as confused, resistant to help, and possibly a danger to yourself living alone. Nothing I'm seeing here, or hearing from you, or reading in this physician's report dated 4 days ago, matches that description in any way. No, I said, it wouldn't. I have to document this visit regardless. But based on what I'm seeing, I'm closing this as unfounded. If someone's building a paper trail against you, the only defense is a better paper trail of your own. She left 20 minutes later. Renee hadn't just tried the bank, the neighbor, the guardianship email. She'd tried the county too. 3 different doors, 3 different institutions, all built on the same story that wasn't true. That's when I understood this wasn't panic on her part anymore, if it ever had been. It was a campaign with a deadline, and I was the only thing standing between her and the finish line. If you think that's the last door she tried, stick around. Subscribe if you haven't already. What I didn't know yet, and what Todd told me much later, was that his own unease had already started before my call ever came. A coworker had mentioned, in passing, seeing Renee's name on a listing site for a moving sale. Furniture, mostly, the kind of thing people sell when they're consolidating a household, not redecorating one. He'd asked her about it. She'd said it was nothing. Just clearing out the garage. He'd let it go, the way he'd let a dozen small things go that year. But he told me afterward that it had sat wrong with him, for days in a way he couldn't quite name. A man 3 weeks a month on the road learns to trust the version of home somebody hands him over the phone. That trust had started fraying at the edges before I ever gave it a reason to. I called Todd that Thursday evening, 3 days before a rekeying I now knew was coming whether I liked it or not. Dad, everything okay? You sound serious. Come by this weekend, just you. Something we need to talk through in person. A pause. The kind a man gives when part of him already suspects something's wrong. Is this about Mom's estate? Are you sick? Not sick. Not about your mother. Just come Saturday, alone. He pulled in at 9 sharp, jacket over one shoulder, thinking he'd been called over for coffee. He had no idea. I made the breakfast I always made him on hard mornings. Eggs, bacon, Dolores's biscuits, the recipe she taught me the year before she passed. We ate. I let him finish his coffee. Let him be comfortable one last time. Then I set the folder in front of him, and Dr. Emerson's report on top of it. He read it slow. His jaw tightened at the email calling me forgetful. The correspondence with Diane Voss. The phrase guardianship conversation. Then he got to the text thread with Carol, and I watched something in him go very still. She scripted the neighbor, he said. Not a question. She did. He picked up Dr. Emerson's report last, read it twice. This is dated last week, he said. James told me to get it before anyone had a reason to dispute it. He set it all down. Didn't speak for almost a full minute. The clock on the stove ticked through it, indifferent to how much a silence like that can weigh. She told me you'd been forgetting things, he said finally. Left the stove on twice, fell in the driveway, called her by Mom's name last month. None of that happened, Todd. Not one word. Something broke loose behind his eyes. Not disbelief. Recognition. The locksmith, he said slowly. She said it was for your safety. I didn't even think to ask you directly. I just believed her. That's not on you the way you think it is. How long have you known? 11 days. Needed it airtight before I brought it to you. He pushed his chair back, pulled out his phone. I need this attorney's number. Today. That's my son. He stayed the whole weekend. Called Renee Sunday night. Said he'd be a day late. Work ran long. First lie he ever told her that actually protected someone. Monday morning, he drove home while I stayed with James, finalizing paperwork of our own. I offered to come. He said no. Said this part was his. I didn't get much done that morning. I kept my phone face up on the desk, waiting on it the way you wait on test results, not managing it particularly well. James noticed, didn't say anything, just gave me the courtesy of pretending not to see a 74-year-old man, checking his phone every 4 minutes like a teenager. If you're invested in this family by now, comment below. What would you have done in Gerald's shoes? Because Todd's about to find out just how far it went. He told me everything after. Renee was at the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee in hand. An ordinary Monday, exactly as she'd expected. Hey, she said. You're back early. He sat down without taking his jacket off, slid the folder across. She looked at it, then at him. He watched something calculating cross her face, already working out what she could still talk her way out of. Todd, I can explain all of this. Then explain it. I was worried about him. You're gone 3 weeks a month. I'm the one who sizes him. You told me he called you by my mother's name. You told me he left the stove on. You told me he fell in the driveway. Frank checked. I checked. Nobody saw a single thing you described. And you scripted Carol Whitmore to back you up if the county ever called. She went quiet. That quiet scared him more than anything she could have said. The guardianship email, he said. Explain that one too. Her face hardened. Whatever was underneath the polish finally stopped holding its shape. You have no idea what it's like, she said, fast and low. We're drowning, Todd, and your father's sitting on a paid-off house and savings he's never going to spend. I was trying to protect our family by lying about his mind, by taking away his right to decide for himself, by putting a new lock on a house he owns outright. She didn't answer that directly. How long has this been the plan? He asked. The Cedar Brook tours, Voss, all of it. Since June, she said, and something in her voice cracked open a little, the first honest thing she'd said all morning. I found her online. She made it sound so reasonable, like everyone does this, like it wasn't really lying, just framing things a certain way. Since June, Todd repeated. That's 5 months, Renee. 5 months of watching me not notice. What was the plan, he asked. If it worked, if he signed. What then? Then he'd have been safe, she said, and even she seemed to hear how thin it sounded. We'd have had breathing room. That's all I wanted. You wanted his house sold and his savings managed by someone who isn't him. That's not breathing room. That's taking what isn't yours and calling it caretaking. Everyone does this, Todd. Every family. You think nobody else has ever had this conversation about an aging parent? Not like this. Not with a script. Not with a stranger on retainer telling you what words to use so a judge believes it. Are you going to tell him I did this to hurt him? I never wanted to hurt him. I wanted to protect us. He already knows. Renee. He's known for 11 days. He watched me read all of this at his kitchen table, and he didn't say a word about hating you. He just started making calls. She flinched at that, the first real crack in her composure since he'd walked in. What happens now? She asked, quieter than anything she'd said so far. Now you talk to your own attorney, and I talk to mine. And we let the people whose job this is figure out what happens to you. That's not cruelty, Renee. That's just what comes next when you build something on lies this specific. Todd stood up. You used his name. You used a stranger paid to coach people through exactly this. You scheduled it around a discount. Whatever you tell yourself that was, that's yours to carry. Not mine, not his. He picked up his keys and walked out. Called me from the driveway before he'd even started the truck. Dad. His voice cracked. I'm coming back. I need to come back. He sat in that driveway a long while before he could make himself drive. Radio off the whole way home. Just tires. and the same question circling, how he hadn't seen it, and what else he might not have. I want to tell you it ended right there in that driveway. It didn't. Real resolution takes longer than a confrontation, and it comes with its own paperwork. 3 days after Todd walked out, Renee filed something first, a petition of her own through a different attorney, formally requesting an emergency capacity evaluation, citing documented concerns from multiple sources close to the family. Carol's name was on it. So was Diane Voss's, listed as a senior care consultant, willing to testify to my documented decline. James wasn't rattled. This is what desperate looks like on paper, Gerald. She knows the evidence is against her, so she's racing to get a judge to see you as impaired before anyone sees her clearly. We beat her to the courthouse with the truth, or we don't beat her at all. I told Frank the whole thing over lunch that week, start to finish. The folder, Marlene, the locksmith, all of it. He set his fork down partway through and didn't pick it back up. Gerald, why didn't you tell me sooner? All of it, not just the account inquiry. Wasn't sure yet what I was dealing with. Didn't want to hand you half a story and have you carry it around not knowing what to do with it. I'd have done something with it. Anything. I know. That's exactly why I waited till I had something worth handing you. He asked if I needed him to say anything to the court, and when I told him James would likely call him as his witness, he just nodded once, the same way he'd nodded 30 years ago, whenever a shift got harder than expected. Said he'd be there. Didn't ask what to say. Just showed up when the day came, same as he always had. James spent the better part of an afternoon prepping me for what to expect. Sat me down at his desk and walked through it like a route he wanted me to know cold before I ever drove it. They're going to ask you questions designed to rattle you. Dates, names, things that don't matter, just to see if you hesitate. You don't need to be perfect. You need to be exactly as steady as you already are every single day of your life. Don't rush your answers. Don't get defensive. Let the paper do the arguing. And if she takes the stand herself, then you sit there and you let her. What about their attorney? What's he going to come at me with? Probably your age. Probably something about routine, memory, whether you've ever misplaced anything, forgotten anything, repeated yourself. Everybody has, Gerald, at 74 or 34. The trick they're hoping for is getting you flustered enough that a normal human moment reads like evidence. Don't take the bait. If you don't remember an exact date, say so plainly. I don't recall the exact date is not a weakness in that courtroom. It's the truth, and the truth doesn't need dressing up. And if he pushes on that, then he's pushing on nothing, and the judge will see that for exactly what it is. The hearing was set for the second week of November. Dr. Emerson's report from that Friday appointment went into the file alongside everything else, dated weeks before Renee's petition even existed, which James said mattered more than almost anything else in the folder. A claim made before the fight started carries a different kind of weight than one made in the middle of it. The courtroom wasn't what I expected. No cameras, no audience, just a small room with fluorescent lights and a judge who looked like she'd heard every version of this story before, and wasn't in the mood for a new one that didn't hold up. Renee's attorney went first, laying out the petition, concerns from multiple sources, a pattern of decline, a family simply trying to act in my best interest. It sounded almost reasonable, said calm and confident in a room like that. I understood, sitting there, exactly how a story like this gets a judge's signature if nobody in the room bothers to check it. Then James stood up. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. He walked the judge through the timeline the way he'd walked it through with me at his desk, weeks earlier. The folder, the joint signer attempt, the guardianship email to Diane Voss, the locksmith authorized for a Thursday I wasn't expected home. Then he called Frank. Frank sat up straight in that witness chair like he was back at the post office giving a report to a supervisor. 30 years of lunches, he told the judge. Never once had he seen me confused about anything I didn't want to be confused about, And he'd been the one to flag the account inquiry in the first place, because it didn't sit right with him, even before I knew to be worried. When Renee's attorney asked if it was possible, he simply hadn't noticed a decline in an old friend. Frank just looked at him and said, "Son, I've had lunch with this man every Tuesday for 30 years. I'd notice." Then James called Dr. Emerson. He confirmed 11 years as my treating physician, walked the court through the physical and cognitive screening he'd performed weeks before any of this, reached a courtroom, and stated plainly that the results showed no impairment of any kind, and that he'd seen absolutely nothing in over a decade of care consistent with the claims in the petition. "Doctor," Renee's attorney asked, "isn't it possible cognitive decline could have developed rapidly in the time since that appointment?" "Possible in theory. I've seen no evidence of it, and nothing in this petition offers any either. Concern isn't a diagnosis. I only have one of those to offer this court, and it says he's fine." Then Marlene took the stand herself. She walked the judge through the file the same calm, unhurried way she'd walked me through it in that coffee shop off 119th Street. The debt, the 4 months of contact with Diane Voss, the coached language, the insurance inquiry Peter Sung had flagged, the locksmith scheduled for a day I wasn't expected home. Renee's attorney tried to shake her on cross, asking whether any of it proved intent rather than simple worry. "Worry doesn't usually come with a script for the neighbor to read from," Marlene said. "And it doesn't usually come with a discount deadline attached to a senior living facility. I document what's there. What's there speaks for itself." Then Marlene's full documentation went into the record: the emails, the coached text messages to Carol, the locksmith authorization, the Cedar Brook discount deadline lined up against the debt like 2 columns in a ledger that were never supposed to be read side by side. Carol didn't show up to testify for Renee. Word got back to me later that she'd called Renee's attorney the week before and asked to be withdrawn as a witness. Said she couldn't say something under oath that she knew wasn't true. I don't know everything that cost her socially in that circle, but I respect that she found her line and stood behind it when it mattered. The judge asked Renee, directly, at one point, to explain the email to Diane Voss. I watched her reach for the same explanation she'd given Todd in that kitchen. Worry, love, wanting to help. And I watched it land in that courtroom exactly as thin as it had landed at my table. The judge didn't interrupt her, just let her finish. The way you let a story run out of road on its own. Before the judge ruled, James stood for a closing statement. Short, the way he does everything. "Your Honor, this petition asks the court to believe a story built entirely on second-hand claims. A fall no one witnessed. A memory lapse no physician ever recorded. A neighbor who herself withdrew rather than repeat it under oath. Meanwhile, the record shows an independent medical evaluation performed before this dispute existed, 30 years of testimony from a man with no stake in the outcome, and a documented financial motive that lines up, line for line, with every step taken against Mr. Hutchins. The court doesn't need to guess at what happened here. It's all been written down." The judge didn't take long after that. Petition denied. A formal order entered blocking any future guardianship or power of attorney action against me without a fresh, independent medical basis, meaning nobody gets to try this again on a rumor, a script, or a discount deadline. The locksmith call never happened. Todd canceled it himself, using his own name, the same week as the hearing. Diane Voss's employer quietly terminated her contract once the complaint from James's office landed on their desk. Turns out, I wasn't the only family in the file, just the one who caught it in time. Todd and I sat in my truck in the courthouse parking lot for a while after the ruling, neither of us in a hurry to drive anywhere. "I keep going back over it," he said. "Every phone call. Every time she mentioned you and I just took it at face value. I'm supposed to be the one person who checks. You didn't have a reason to check, son. That's how it's built to work. You check the people who've given you a reason not to trust them. She hadn't, until she had. Doesn't make it feel any better. No, I said, it doesn't. But you drove home that Monday, and you asked the questions instead of just believing the next thing she told you. That's the part that matters now. Not what you missed. What you did once you stopped missing it. He didn't say much after that, just sat there a while longer, then started the truck. Todd filed for divorce 11 days after that kitchen conversation. He told me later the hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It was realizing how easily he'd believed a story about his own father, simply because it had been told to him calmly, by someone he trusted completely. He said it changed the way he listens to people now. Not in a suspicious way, just a more careful one. Asking a follow-up question instead of nodding along. Checking the thing that's easy to check instead of assuming somebody else already had. He moved into my guest room that fall while he sorted out where he'd land. Next. Neither of us minded the company. We fell into an old rhythm without either of us planning it. Him doing dishes while I dried, both of us watching whatever game was on. Not talking much, not needing to. One evening, a few weeks into that arrangement, he asked me how I'd managed to stay so calm through all of it. The folder, the hearing, watching a stranger try to drill a new lock into a house I'd lived in for decades. Wasn't calm, I told him. Just quiet about it. There's a difference. Calm is not feeling anything. Quiet is feeling all of it and deciding it wasn't going to be the thing that ran the show. He thought about that a long moment, then went back to the dishes. Didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. The divorce settlement took until spring to finalize. Todd's attorney used the guardianship petition, and everything Marlene had documented as part of the record, which meant the house in Leawood sold that winter to cover debts that were never mine to begin with, and Renee walked away with considerably less than the life she'd been trying so hard to protect. James told me once, dryly, that people rarely calculate how much a scheme like that costs to run until it's already failed and somebody's totaling the bill. I heard, secondhand, that Renee moved out of state the following year, somewhere no one knew the story. I don't wish her ill. Mostly what I feel now isn't anger. It's something closer to sadness, for a woman who had a decent life already in front of her and gambled it on a shortcut. She lost more than she bet. I still live on Larkspur Lane. Same brass deadbolt Dolores and I installed in 2003, never touched by a stranger's drill. Frank and I still get lunch on Tuesdays. Todd comes by most Sundays. No folder, no brochure. Just coffee. Carol still waves from her porch. I wave back. Some people find their nerve a little late, but they find it. I think about that locksmith sometimes, kneeling at my door and following a work order somebody else built out of nothing. He wasn't the villain here. He was just a man doing a job, trusting the paperwork in front of him was honest. That's the part that stays with me, not the anger, but the reminder that the people meant to protect you and the people meant to profit from you can be sitting at the very same kitchen table, and it takes a clear eye and a good paper trail to tell which one is which. Frank asked me once, not long after the hearing, whether I regretted any of it. The notebook, the folder, dragging his name into a courtroom over something that started with a stove that was never actually left on. Not for a second, I told him. The regret would have been not looking. Coming home one day to a house with new locks and no way back in, wondering the rest of my life why nobody said anything sooner. He nodded at that, and we went back to our coffee like it was any other Tuesday, because by then, mostly, it was. If something in this sounded familiar, a folder that showed up uninvited, a relative suddenly worried about your stairs, a neighbor calling with a fall that never happened, a form that only needs your signature. Talk to somebody today. See your own doctor, get it on record before you ever need it. Don't wait for the man with the drill. Hit subscribe. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Real justice doesn't come with a soundtrack. It comes with paperwork, patience, and people finally being made to answer for what they did. Thank you for being here. I'll see you in the next one.